very briefly go through this beautiful poem by Patrick Kavanagh. It is a poem which reflects quite a lot of the features of his work that you'll see in the mind maps. It is deeply personal and it is reflective and it has got a real sense of place. This time, this is a poem I suppose that was written in his early life. So that moment of epiphany that we have discussed that is so evident in the Canal sonnets, and the philosophy around which he describes so beautifully in Advent, that hasn't happened to him yet. So the person who writes this poem is not the kind of centered, spiritually content human being who's determined to value every day of his life and to celebrate the everyday miracles. The person who writes this poem is immensely talented but feels isolated and frustrated. The place, this is Inishkeen Road, which is in Monaghan, where he was from. And I suppose when you're looking at the poem, you got to think about themes to do with isolation and loneliness, but also I think ambition. There's no doubt there was a vanity in Kavanagh. Anybody who's read On Raglan Road will be able to see that. Is there something wrong with vanity? I don't think there is. I think most people have a connection between their pride and their drive and their sense of, self-importance, which I suppose once it's measured is perfectly human. But anyway, I wanted to show you really quickly some of the things that I find interesting in this poem. Remember, when you're studying a poem, you're thinking about aspects of style and you're thinking about thematic content. This is a sonnet. Kavanagh enjoyed writing in sonnet form. We know that he wrote Canal Bank Walk, lines written, and The Hospital are all sonnets, and this is a sonnet too. It's a sonnet which is divided into your octave first line sequence, which kind of establishes a scenario in a narrative sense. He brings you to Inishkeen Road and a July evening and shows us something happening, and then there's the sestet, the last 6 lines, and that has the reflection, which is the money of the poem. Okay, so in the first stanza he describes a group of young people arriving for a social occasion. The bicycles go by in twos and threes. There's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. And there's the half-talk code of mysteries and the wink and elbow language of delight. 8:30 and there is not a spot upon a mile of road, no shadowed throne that might turn out a man or woman, not a footfall tapping secrecies of stone. Beautifully fluent. See how easy it was to read that? It flows so beautifully. That's not by accident. There's some absolutely beautiful rhyming going on. You can see trees, tonight, mysteries, delight, spot, throne, not stone. So there's a you almost won't notice the rhyming, but the rhyming allows the words to flow with such beautiful rhythm. And then of course you have the meter that might turn out a man or woman, not a footfall tapping secrecies of stone. There's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. That one goes slightly over. But what you've got is a poem that is written in iambic pentameter. And if you know anything about iambic pentameter, you'll know that simply means when each line has usually 10 syllabic beats. First one is unstressed, followed by a stressed syllable. That doesn't really matter at our stage. But what it does is it creates this rhythm. I remember years ago watching a brilliant documentary in which the actress Fiona Shaw, who was a great Irish Shakespearean actress, she just explained iambic pentameter in the most, for me, the most memorable term. She said, it approximates to the number of syllables that we can speak in English without having to draw a breath. So when you get to the end of the line, that's when you draw the breath. So it means that the lines flow. And Kavanagh shows us as a writer, if we're interested in writing, that there's craft to making a line feel as if it's natural. and he's a craftsman. No more than Bishop was, a master of her craft, no more than any of the poets are. It's worth noting that when you're looking at a poet's work. What do they do to make the poetry interesting? So we have the alliteration there, the Billy Brennan's Barn, which really, it's a very famous line. Everybody remembers that line. It roots the story being described in this particular place by giving it that name, and the alliteration kind of drawing our attention to that particular line. But really what's most interesting is this use of compound word adjectives. Half talk and wink and elbow. This was something that, one of the things I particularly love about Kavanagh is his inventiveness. He's known for the use of neologisms, which basically means he often would make words up to suit his purposes. And compound word adjectives, they're not quite neologisms, but I mean, you could argue they are, because when you take two new words and you add them together to make a new word, well, isn't that a neologism? Anyway, let's not split hairs on it. But the use of that phrase, half talk and wink and elbow, what it does is it communicates his sense of being an outsider. A code is a secret language, and only people with the cipher can understand what's happening. When people communicate through wink and elbow, it's communicating through symbols, sign language. And what Kavanagh is doing there is he's saying he doesn't understand this mystery of social interaction. And that's why when all of the people on their bicycles and twos and threes go by to Billy Brennan's Barn, he's left standing outside on the road outside. And actually, when you drill down into it, it's quite a moving little piece of description of being an outsider. He'd love to be in the barn with those people. He'd love to be, enjoying that interaction. But no, he's left alone outside in this kind of very haunting landscape where no shadow is thrown. There's not a man or a woman. And then there's not even the sound of a footfall tapping secrecies of stone. So you get this real sense of absolute silence and isolation. And the reason he felt that was because he didn't fit in. He didn't feel comfortable. He was socially awkward, and thereby he was excluded, or I don't think it was an active exclusion, but he, by a process of those realities, was excluded from interaction with his peers. So it's on that alone, in terms of a piece of narrative poetry, personal writing, inventive language, ability to create a scenario and a scene and an atmosphere, like the sibilance there in secrecies of stone, that repetition of the S sound, it's really marvelous, because what it does is it captures the hushed, quiet mood of the rural road at night time when nobody's around. So this is a master craftsman at work in this poem, even though he was very, very young when he wrote this poem. Anyway, for me, the half-thought code of mysteries, the wink and elbow language of the light, they're brilliant quotes to learn, because they capture something about his inventiveness as a writer, but also about his sense of isolation and loneliness. And just think that idea of codes and mysteries as being indicative of, or symbolic of, or representative of his being an outsider, not understanding the language. But for me, the two best things in this poem come in the sestet. And the first one, and the first thing that I don't understand how anybody couldn't learn this poem and not learn these two lines, is I have what every poet hates in spite of all the solemn talk of contemplation. Beautiful. Look at the directness of that language. Look at the honesty of that language. What did we say good person writing has? Has an anecdote followed by a reflection. And what does it also have? It has a confessional tone. And what he's essentially saying is, sometimes I lie to make myself feel better. Sometimes writers say, oh, well, it's really important, to be alone with your thoughts, because then you get to think about the serious things in life and concentrate on your art. So I don't mind being on my own. And he says, that's bullshit. I hate it. The honesty there is compelling. Wonderfully compelling. And the language is so direct. That first line of the sestet, I have what every poet hates in spite. The language is monosyllabic. The line contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words, and 6 of them are words of one syllable. So there's a directness, a determination to be honest there, which is so refreshing. And then the last part, there's a bit of humour in the last part, but I just love the allusion in the last part. I love allusions in writing. I think they enrich writing. They give writing a depth, a complexity that I find rewarding. And I remember reading Kavanagh when I was younger than you are, and I was doing my leaving cert. It was in 5th year. It would have been about 15. I did my leaving cert a bit younger, with no 4th year when I was in school. And I remember reading and listening to Mary Bugle, the great English teacher in Wild Park College in Clondalkin in the late 80s, telling me who Alexander Selkirk was. And I never knew who he was. And he was this Scottish guy, real guy, who became famous because he survived a shipwreck. And his story gave Daniel Defoe the inspiration to write the famous novel Robinson Crusoe. And when she explained that to me, it was really one of those moments where, okay, I get it. Because what he's saying is, what is the point of being, having your own private island if you've no one to share it with? What's the point in being, really good at something if nobody knows you are? You feel lonely and you feel like your life is a waste. That's him being really honest. I mean, I was talking to somebody earlier on about how, you have to not worry about the world and not worry about other people and just take pride in what you do and set your own bar. But we all know how hard that is. We're social animals. So when he says, Alexander Selkirk knew the plight means suffering of being king and government and nation. What he's saying is, there's no point in having power, ability, talent, whatever it is, if you've got no one to share it with. And in Monaghan, he felt he had no one to share his love of literature with, his talent with. He was very talented. And that's why he felt he had to leave. And famously, he did. I think it was in 1934. I'm happy to be corrected on that. And he walked all the way to Dublin, hoping to find somewhere to belong. So it's a brilliant poem. And the last line, I am king of banks and stones and every bloomin' thing, is fantastic. And I've had this discussion with many people over the years. And he says blooming thing. Is that a reference to the beauty of nature? I don't think so. I think when he says blooming, he means fucking. As in, what's the point? What's the point of being the king of a place where there is no ability to be appreciated? So there's an ego there that might be off-putting for some of you. There's an honesty there. For me, there's a humanity in that poem. There's an inventiveness. God, I'm so jealous when I read writers like Kavanagh. What a talented man he was. And an ability to do that thing that great personal writers do. Talk about something utterly, singularly about his experience. Bring his experience to life with a bit of individual observation. Where was the dance? It was in a barn. Whose barn? Billy Brennan's barn. Where was it? Inishkeen Road. When was it? July. All those little details. That's what we mean in personal writing when we say, individual observation. But what we're looking for here is the really, really clever use of language. And the Alexander Selkirk allusion. The symbolism of the man adrift on an island, utterly alone, longing for human company. That's Kavanagh when he writes this poem. So there you go. I hope you found that useful and might be able to use it in terms of your preparation for Kavanagh.